Hello and welcome to the first of a very special Back of the Nest, the Palace Years. This is for season 2009-10, a remarkable season for Palace. The year we went into administration and very nearly lost our club. The year of the Sheffield Wednesday game. The year of Darren Ambrose being absolutely insane. And the year we unfortunately let Jerson dos Santos go. Gutted.
Back of the Nest, the Palace Years.
Helping me today, we have Chris Clark.
Hello.
Patrick O'Connor.
Hello.
And Mike Scott.
All right, boys and girls.
That was different. Okay, so first up, we're going to talk about the first half of the season, but we can't start anywhere else than talking about the team that we had and the players that went in and out of that squad. So the team itself, gents, are very, very exciting. Very, very nostalgic. Do I jump straight to Alisson Ndiaye? No, I don't. Speroni well established as our top goalkeeper. Kleiny had broken through at right back. We had Clint Hill somehow still playing at left back, much to his surprise as well as everybody else's. Sean Derry was in there with a variety of different haircuts. Paddy McCarthy and Jose Font. Darren Ambrose, as mentioned in the intro. Neil Dans, of course, in midfield. We signed Stern John. Remember him? Stern John? Nick Carl, in his final season for Palace, promised a lot. Didn't really deliver, but, you know, what a wonderful potential player he was. And, of course, it was our final season of Victor Moses, the prodigious talent. A few other players of note, Sean Scannell was in there, Matt Lawrence, Calvin Andrew, of course, Alan Lee, who had joined us from Ipswich halfway through the previous season, Danny Butterfield, who has a very memorable moment in this season, Johnny Ertel was there, Claude Davis, Nick Gillard's favourite, of course, Ryan Smith had a couple of games, James Comley played in 2 games. Famously, all he really did as a professional footballer was being photographed on the floor outside of a club having urinated himself, poor James. Alisson Ndiaye, as mentioned, Alex Winter, and of course it saw the first ever appearance from a certain Wilfried Zaha. Lots in there, gents. Anything stand out to you? I've just asked you all at once, so deal with it.
Okay, I'm going to jump in and say that I really, really enjoyed watching Neil Dans play for Palace. And, yeah, I mean, that season, you know, I mean, we're going to talk about Darren Ambrose and his purple patch in this particular season. But Neil Dans scored some spectacular goals, and he was our second highest scoring player that season. Fantastic, and I was gutted to see him go the year after.
Yeah, Scannell, Duns and Moses in one season. That makes me a little bit wet, I've got to say. You've got the kind of grey hair of Sean Derry as well. So, yeah, that's good to think about.
Yeah, I mean, a bit creepy how you said it, but it was good to think about. So the players we brought in, the players of note, I might have missed some in this, but of course the aforementioned Stern John was brought in, I think from Birmingham, if my memory works correctly, to be our new striker alongside West Ham United loanee Freddie Sears. We'll talk about the fact that Freddie never scored a goal for Palace and what happened to his prodigious talent. And of course, Darren Ambrose, free transfer from Charlton Athletic, and what an incredible signing that was. Has to be down as one of our most important ever signings, I would say. But out, we lost Carl Fletcher, not the one from Dream Team, but the real one. James Scowcroft. Yep. Jerson dos Santos, as I mentioned in the intro. I suppose we better get into old Jerson dos Santos. So we signed him as a youth player from Sutton United at a time where Mick Jones kept calling Kyle Da Silva Kyle dos Santos. And it caused a degree of confusion as to how highly rated this young player was. However, he never made a senior appearance and was listed on our transfers out, so I thought I'd include him.
I've just got to say, Patrick O'Connor has a pretty much photographic memory for Palace players, and I always back him to be right on any memory, and he did not remember that this man existed. So I did have to look him up to see if he did. He's had an illustrious career that means he's currently without a club. He doesn't even have a picture on the site I was looking at. I'm really not sure that he existed.
Right, well, there we go. He did, right? He definitely existed, but he wasn't who we kind of thought he was, or who Mick Jones thought he was. Um, one of the other players that went out, and I'm going to ask you a question, gents, and I'll come to you an answer from you at the end. Unless you can answer immediately, Paul Ifill, remember him? Constantly injured with back problems, but a terrific player on his day. However, we let him go before this season began. Who did he join? There we go. Who did he join? Well, we'll come back to that one later on. Probably Mikey will have to remind me as we wrap up the show later. But it'll be interesting to see if the correct answer pops into anybody's brains. Those of you at home who know, shout as hard as you can into the speaker of whatever you happen to be listening to on, and we will hear you. Just going to wait for you to do that. Hold on.
I wonder if you ask Alexa if that would work.
Yeah, you guys, that's an interesting one. I'll get Mikey on that as well. You can ask Alexa, see if Alexa knows. But anyway, we'll check that one out later on. Nobody shouting into the speaker did it loud enough for me to hear, unfortunately. We also let Royce Wiggins go at some point to Norwich during this, and we'll talk about him again in just a moment. And the remarkable John Oster. Everybody remember John Oster?
Yes, I saw him play against Hereford in the League Cup at Stellar Park.
Oh, there we go. He was pretty decent for us, but he left under a bit of a cloud. And then when he came back playing for another team, Doncaster Rovers, he absolutely ran the show, single-handedly defeated us. He was sensational. That's how angry he was when he left. So I'll always kind of resent him for that, because he was obviously capable of being a phenomenal player in his day, and he showed it against us more than he did for us. But there we are. So this season, to take you back, began with Palace actually went out to America for their pre-season trip, which is unheard of as a championship club under the stewardship of Simon Jordan at the time. Of course, Neil Warnock, the manager. And we went out to America because of a new club we created called Crystal Palace Baltimore. Now, I say we created, we were obviously part of that. It was there was an existing club in Baltimore that had a bunch of players, and I can't remember the guy's name who headed it up. But anyway, we invested in that and created Crystal Palace Baltimore. And it was this whole... I mean, part of it was right that football was going to take off in a massive way in the US, but we thought we'd be a big part of that, and unfortunately it didn't happen. But Patrick, you remember it well.
Yeah, the way the system's set up over here is that we have the MLS is the top league, and the USL, United Soccer League, is the lower, and it goes inside a couple of tiers. So what Simon Jordan decided to do, which wasn't a bad idea, was to invest in the club in Baltimore, thinking that if he could, they could develop young American players, they would at some point get loaned out or go to Palace, and vice versa. We would take some of our academy players and have them play over in USL, but it didn't quite work out. The league that they were in wasn't really well funded or attended. And again, though it was a good idea at the time, unfortunately, it didn't work out. Funny enough, that with the American owners coming in, subsequently, we've made several other tours over to America, been not much more successful. But unfortunately, that whole idea of doing it didn't quite work out for us.
No, definitely not. I think there was potentially a bit of a misunderstanding about how easy it was to get players from America to come over to Palace. Loads came over to train. But obviously signing them is a different story, work permits and all that kind of stuff. So really, I think the club decided to target players with European heritage, but even then you're kind of reducing the pool that you can actually pick from. But a bit of a disappointment, but it was a very interesting trip.
I was reading up about them, and it looked like they only lasted a season, but their goalkeeper had the best name ever, Evan Bush. I mean, that is just excellent. Yeah, it looked as though they had one UK player as well, but yeah, only lasted a year, which is pretty sad. How much money did they lose from it? Do you know?
No idea, but all of it.
Yeah,
all of it, everything that was in it.
I think when administration, that same season didn't work out. But another thing I wanted to add about the USL and everything is that, again, as bad as Jordan's idea was at the time, you think about it now with the MLS, with the affiliation that NYCFC has with Man City and Melbourne in Australia. He was actually a man and way ahead of his time, because it's a lot of clubs now are doing what Jordan wanted to do, which was to have a an affiliate in different countries. But like you said, Hambo, the problem is that getting work permits for American players in England, it couldn't work out because of the whole EU thing. But again, it was a good idea, just that this unfortunately was like about 10 years too early and about £100 million short.
Yeah, and I think perhaps the worst thing of all with this pre-season trip was that player I mentioned as a transfer out later on in the season was a guy called Royce Wiggins. People may know of him from the fact that he did have a career later on playing for Bournemouth, Norwich, and Charlton, and did reasonably well. But he was unfortunately never the player that he could have been at the time. He was incredibly highly rated by Palace. He was a real attacking left back. Brilliant on the ball, and he was actually keeping Gareth Bale out of the Welsh under-21 side at the time, and I think they were a very similar age. I think Bale was perhaps a year or two younger, but extremely highly rated. And there was a player called Maurice Edu, USA international and future Rangers player, who put in an absolutely horrific challenge on him and smashed his knee to pieces. And he ended up retiring at 30, Royce Wiggins, and it was very much a what could have been. So. That was a real sour note for the trip.
Yeah, didn't he have a long career at Charlton? He played for Charlton for years.
Yeah, he played over 120 odd games for them, I think it was. But he got injured at a time where he was just about to break into our team. He'd played, I think it was a game. I think they came in as a sub or started the game against Forest for his debut the previous season, and it was just one of those who was just talked about for quite a while and got international recognition with Wales at, again, under 21 level before he'd even made an appearance for Palace, and talk of him. I think he may have even made it into the full squad at one stage. So again, real talent, but absolutely ruined by injury from a horrible challenge from a player who actually went on to a pretty impressive future, who was playing for Crystal Palace Baltimore at the time. Anyway, let's move on from the pre-season trip. Palace didn't start particularly well this season. We opened the season with a 1-1 draw against Plymouth. And our new dream strike force, if you can possibly imagine a strike force like this, which was Stern John and Freddie Sears. That game ended with Stern John breaking his arm on his debut, which was brilliant. And Freddie Sears missing a host of chances despite an impressive all-round performance, which became something of a theme for him in a Palace shirt, gents, because the very next game, the Freddie Sears ghost goal. If you don't remember it, look it up. It is absolutely outrageous. And it turned Neil Warnock a very unique shade of purple afterwards. So Freddie Sears scored against Bristol City, a game we ended up losing 1-0. You're confused, I can tell it already, because I've said he scored and we lost the game 1-0. So what actually happened? Well, what happened is, as he tucked the ball away in the bottom left corner, it hit the base of the goal. They don't really have those in goals anymore. They sort of pin the nets down in a different way, but it actually had a bar running all the way across the bottom. It hit that bar and came out of the net. Obviously, Palace went off celebrating, but no goal given. An absolute travesty. Now, Patrick, I know you remember that.
Yes. I actually remember Clive Adams too. Remember Clive Adams' goal?
I've seen it on the video.
Palace are famous. That was 79 when he came over for it in the Kenny Sansom deal. But yeah, and the thing is, if you've ever watched it, it's pretty clear that it's a goal. So it's amazing the way the players reacted, why the referee didn't see it. And, obviously it wouldn't happen now with the goal line technology, but Freddie Sears never recovered. I really think mentally it really affected him, because it was his second game for Palace. He had come over, pretty decent. He's actually, was supposed to be a decent player, and he never ever kicked on. And talk about confidence with strikers, and the guy actually scored a goal and it didn't count. It was actually an amazingly ridiculous and bizarre event, and a ridiculously bizarre season actually.
Yeah, it really was. Yeah, obviously 19 years old, and it's his moment, and it's only 2 games in, and he was hopeless for the rest of the season. Chris, do you remember Freddie Sears?
Barely, frankly.
Barely.
But I do remember that ghost goal, and it just being completely outrageous. My big reflection on it, just listening to what Patrick's saying about the psychological effect, is what on earth would happen to Benteke if something like that happened
exactly.
to him?
Absolutely right. But he just, Patrick made the point, confidence players, and some more so than others, and particularly with strikers, it just makes such a difference. He could have had an entirely different career, but for that one terrible refereeing decision. And for all the grief people are giving VAR at the moment, and obviously goal line technology, it just wouldn't have happened in the modern game. And yeah, it only happens to Palace, you kind of feel. But so off the back of that, we actually won our first game of the season. We went to Ipswich and won 3-1 with Ipswich old boy Darren Ambrose grabbing 2 goals, and that kicked off his absolutely outrageous season. And I want to take a moment now to talk about that season from Darren Ambrose. So, Mike, you would know Darren Ambrose as a player, as a reputation when he joined Palace. Obviously, very early on, he got attention for being a teenager at, excuse me, damn it, being a teenager at Ipswich, and then signed by Bobby Robson at Newcastle for big money at the time. Went with a real promising reputation and never quite made it, and of course ended up at Charlton, which is the worst thing that could possibly happen to anybody. But when we signed him, did you have any idea that he would go on and be the player he was for Palace?
I don't remember feeling too positive about him signing at all, to be honest. And in my head, we hadn't won about the first 6 or 7 in the season. I was surprised to look back and see that we did beat Ipswich, and went back and watched his goals. And he obviously, by the third game, had already netted 2. So that surprises me, because in my head he had quite a poor start. But after you get into it, but after the sort of however many games it was, 12 games that we went on the bounce without losing, I was his biggest fan. But yeah, it definitely came out of nothing, and he had a kind of endearing quality to him that got me interested straight away.
Definitely, and Patrick, I don't know if you feel this way. When I saw him play for us, I think those early 2 goals definitely helped, but it just seemed that he found the right manager for him. As soon as Warnock signed him, and as Warnock's on record as saying he really, really wanted the player, he knew exactly where to play him. He didn't give him too much defensive responsibility, because that wasn't his game. He just let him operate in little pockets around the front, and it just worked so well with the players around him.
It really didn't. That really probably couldn't happen to the in the modern game, as far as 10 years on or so, because of the fact that you don't allow a player to just sit behind the striker and do whatever he wants and never come back. But you're absolutely right. He was the perfect Warnock player, and you got to give Warnock credit, because, like you just said, Warnock definitely he says it that he wanted the player, and he knew how side he wanted to play and where he wanted to play him, and he got off to a decent start, and he had a fantastic season. And again, it wasn't like he was a modern day striker. He was more of a sit behind the striker type player, and the fact he scored so many goals that season and did so well is an absolutely amazing, especially as we get on to the end of the season and what he did in that final game. But yeah, he had a great year for us. He really did.
And linked to that, I think one of the things that I observed watching as much as I could, looking back of this season, is at the time I thought we were quite a good side. And actually the league table shows that, if you take account of the fact that things happen later on. But the remarkable thing for me is actually, if you just look at the physicality of the players and the way that they're playing, it's completely different to look at our championship team of that time compared to the Premier League side that we are today. It's just remarkable. I don't want to come over all Arsenal fan TV, but it's, the difference is just transformational. But the other thing I will say is that, Patrick, you've made a point there about, you couldn't have a player doing that now. I mean, that's certainly true at our level. Is that true in the Championship? I don't know. I don't watch as much Championship football. I've become everything I used to hate when Palace were in the Championship, and I used to think this competition matters far more than the effing Premier League. But I don't watch it as much. But I suspect that the reality is that you probably could still have a luxury player like someone like him or Moritz in the way that you can't in the Prem.
Oh, good shout with the Moritz comparison there. I think it's an interesting point you make, Chris. yeah, you tend to say that the level at the Premier League just does not allow that at all. But I think from what I have seen of the Championship, the level of the Championship has gone up a little bit. But there are still players there that do have those moments, and there's a lot of players getting goals from wide positions as well in the Championship. I find. So it's definitely it's a level down, but the intensity is still there. I just think mistakes get punished a little bit less at that level, perhaps. And talking of the mistakes being punished, that's what happened with Darren Ambrose. And at times it wasn't even mistakes. They would take a little pot shot from sort of from distance, not really catch it particularly well, but it just would just always find the net. But of course, there were the goals that he would catch properly as well, which were absolutely astonishing at times. And I only missed one home game that season, and I think it was it Sheffield United? I think we were playing. I don't know if I've got that right, whether they're even in the league that year. But I remember the goal because I sort of saw it on highlights. That was the first time I hadn't seen the goal live, and it's when the ball sort of dropped over his shoulder, and he did this just fantastic volley, or half volley into the top corner. And he just would try anything, and it would just seem to work every single time. But what a player he was for us, and watching him whatever we went through in that season, seeing Darren Ambrose on that form, playing that well, and being able to witness a team put together that just basically just gave him every opportunity to show what a talented footballer he was. It was a real privilege to watch, and again, but for things being a little bit different, who knows what he potentially could have gone on to do in a Palace shirt, because he certainly didn't seem to want to leave the club, and obviously didn't until a bit through the next season. But there we go. Fantastic player, and a great period of watching Palace in this run up to Christmas. And unfortunately, after that win in September, we actually had to wait until. Sorry, that win in August. We had to wait until September the 19th against Derby for the next win. But that was a run of about 8-9 games, something like that. So really struggling towards the foot of the table, not really picking up wins and a draw here and there, but really not doing well enough. But as soon as we beat Derby, it sparked a fantastic run. It was 1 in 12 we lost. We lost against Leicester during that period, but we really started closing in on those playoff places, and I think we all started dreaming of what might be. And running up to Christmas, I have a real highlight. Hopefully you gents will remember this game. We played Reading away, and it was where we first saw Victor Moses. Victor Moses was 18 at the time, and obviously had promised so much from being rumoured as he was talked about from about the age of 12. I think he scored all 9 goals in a Youth Cup final for Palace, and various other things. Talked about that he would be the next big thing, and he'd sort of been in and out of the side from sort of 16 and 17, but really started to show his potential. And there were 2 goals he scored in the game against Reading, which we won 4-2, which were absolutely sensational. And actually had Neil Warnock saying this, which I thought was interesting considering what happens later on. He said, "You could tell that Victor was on his game, and he has been since I brought him back into the team. Everybody is looking at him now. They pay £17 million for players like that in the Premier League. God, things have moved on, haven't they? You don't get 18-year-old British players like that very often, and he will go for sure." So there you go. Really talking the player up for a big sale, and not quite what happened.
Yeah, I remember that game well. So the Watford game before it as well are the 2 that stick in my head. Looking down that list, I can't remember some of the others. I certainly can't remember the 0-0 draw of Sheffield Wednesday. But that Watford game, I definitely thought at that point things are going really well. And then, yeah, you're right. Those two goals. I got really carried away at that point because as Chris mentioned earlier, it did seem like a really great side at the time. Later in the season, we'll discuss it when we had the run in the FA Cup. It felt like this was a side that was balanced, and this was a side that could go, towards the playoffs. And that particular period before Christmas absolutely cemented that. And when he came into the side, you get carried away straight away. That's exactly what happened.
Yeah. No, you're right. And the talk of the balance in the squad is exactly right. And we had And plenty of players that were contributing to that. And, Sean Scannell was making a real impact in the side at the time. And this is an ideal opportunity to talk about Alassane Ndiaye, isn't it? Do you remember him? Yeah, he existed. Mikey, before we started recording, was the only one who really said that he liked him as well, I think. I remember Warnock talking about him and saying that he just loves the fact that he plays with a big smile on his face. But as a player, so he was massive, wasn't he? He was probably about 6'4", like pretty gangly. And he had let's face it, he had a head like a pufferfish, didn't he? Let's be honest, that's exactly what he looked like. If you Google his name now, you'll see pictures of him. Just think pufferfish. But he in one moment of a game, he could pull off ridiculous skill and then trip over the ball and put it out of play. And for some reason, that really, really appealed to me. But he actually chipped in with loads of goals. Not loads of goals, a fair few important goals. Was quite a tough tackler when he was up for the game, and he was a very unique player. And I really liked him. And unfortunately, he had a bit of an attitude by all accounts, and obviously thought he was better than he was. And clearly, what happened to him afterwards? Well, I remember him dropping down the divisions like a stone. Cropped up at Barnet at one stage, and he was playing in, I think, Cyprus.
He ended up at Hastings.
Yeah.
But he was an absolute unit. I think you're doing him a disservice when you say about the pufferfish. Like, he was, and I'm sure still is, an absolute unit. That's mostly what I can remember about him. 29 appearances that season.
Yeah, but
Yeah,
Chris is exaggerating. Chipped in a few goals. Few meaning 3. Exactly 3 goals. Now, I understand why you get carried away because, that's very nostalgic. I remember him too. Very skillful. They would trip over the ball, but if they chipped him in a few goals, it's a bit of a stretch. But I understand your enthusiasm.
I think he scored about a 25-yard header against West Brom. Yeah, exactly.
To what extent, I don't remember having much opinion on him one way or the other. I can't remember him being like a firm fan favourite. I don't know how you and Mikey remember him, but
no, he was ridiculed and absolutely torn apart.
Yeah.
But he played 29 games. I think he came into the side sort of out of nowhere, and as you say, he was a unit with the head of a pufferfish, and he actually made an impact on the squad, on the side. And again, I think the game against, I'm sure it's West Brom where he scored an equaliser with a ridiculously long range header. He just had this knack of occasionally popping up with something important. But just at one stage when we got him in, there was rumours immediately, I think, that Blackburn were going to buy him and going to offer $2 million for him straight away. And it's one of those moments where you think, yeah, if that was any chance of that happening, we should have immediately taken that. But yeah, interesting player, and one of those. I think he could have been a cult hero if he'd had just slightly more of a brain.
It's kind of easy with hindsight, isn't it? Because he was 19, then he's still only 29 now. I mean, just to be clear, I've looked back through his history, as you said, about going down through the leagues. My God. Some of the clubs that he's played for, I'm not convinced even exist. I suspect that some of us may have been playing about on Wikipedia, adding these things. Yeah. I've what can you say? That's enough, I think.
Yeah, you're probably right. That's probably more airtime than he's ever had before. But I don't know. I've got a fondness for the sort of unique players, if you like. But there we are. So fond memories of Alassane Ndiaye. So look, that takes us up to the Christmas period. The players were firing on all cylinders. We got through Christmas quite strongly, and we took ourselves into January, just outside the playoffs, and onto a flight up to play Newcastle, who are going great guns.
Crystal Palace is now in administration. With estimated debts of 30 million, these are weary times for fans.
For the fans who headed up to Newcastle tonight, it was a long journey. And if the match doesn't go the way they want, it'll feel even longer coming back to an uncertain financial future and a place in the table far from where they'd hoped.
During that period, players were sold, and Simon had effectively he made a deal with a hedge fund whereby they would get a large percentage of the money from the players that were sold. But unfortunately, we had football debts that had to be met first. So basically the way it works is if you owe back transfer money when you sell another player, the Football League get that money first, and they settle all of your other debts before you get the money. So when the club sold Jose, not a lot of that money actually got into the hands of the hedge fund. So they were looking for another player sale. Simon was talking to us about a deal for us to buy the debt, and then the transfer window closed. There hadn't been another player sale. We were still talking about, there was literally paperwork going backwards and forwards on email that afternoon, and the next thing that the fund had called in the administrator.
Landing at Newcastle, and we get texts that we're going into administration. Even Simon was embarrassed. He didn't know it was coming then, and having to react, and for the lads to play so well at Newcastle after hearing that on our way in, and the bus driver, when they find out we were going to administration, we took us into the hotel. I remember him ringing. They couldn't take us to the ground unless they were paid in advance. I'm thinking, what are we doing here?
We landed at Newcastle, and all our phones started ringing, text messages and stuff, and we thought, what's going on? And then we knew that we went into administration. But we knew the situation wasn't great before that, but we never thought we were going to get to that point. So when we landed at Newcastle, then we realized, okay, this is worse than we really thought it was.
So there we go. Palace 10 points down by the time they got off the plane, and obviously those moments there kind of really bring it into focus what it was like for the players. They had a game to go to, but all that uncertainty, even though they were aware that the club were in a little bit of bother, that seemed to come as a surprise to everybody, and certainly a surprise to the fans. And it was a huge game, because we were going into that game looking to take on Newcastle, get a result there that could potentially put us in the playoffs. And in the form that we had, we all know what it's like when a club gets momentum. Again, it's a what might have been moment for us, but straight away, obviously lost that game. Weirdly, had a bounce directly afterwards where we won 3 games, one of which was a cup game. But it really had a huge impact on our season, because the mentality of having to adjust from a promotion chase to a relegation battle through nothing. You'd already won the points to put you in the position that you were in, and through nothing that the players have done to suddenly have to deal with, now you're not getting out of this division this year like you thought you might, but you might get out of this division the other way if you're not careful. And yeah, it had a huge impact on everybody around the club, and it was just horrible. And obviously more and more information is available these days about exactly the events that went on. And it was the danger of the hedge fund. And Simon Jordan's book, Be Careful What You Wish For, is a good source of information from that, because he just kept taking risks to cover. Obviously it was the ITV digital collapse that initially put the club, everybody in football, into a bit of bother, around anyone in the Football League into a bit of bother. Personally, he'd had issues with the housing market, and he just didn't have the money that he previously had to keep funding the club. And horrible times to be a Palace fan, because it just got more and more worrying. And of course, we'll talk about the sale of players in just a moment.
Yeah, it's not just Simon Jordan's book. If you turn on TalkSport when he's on air, he's guaranteed to refer to it every single time he's on air. So, you can probably pick it up from there. But that January was worrying times, because we lost Font, as was alluded to there, I think, by Paris. And I remember at the time thinking, this is really bad. Like, he was a mainstay for the first half of the season. I don't know how many games he missed, but I remember being a huge fan of his, and I was fairly gutted. And obviously he's gone on to have an excellent career, including being current European champion. So, and he's gone on for a player of that age. He's done amazing things, and it's testament to how good he actually was that he's still doing things now.
Yeah, it's funny, when Peter Taylor signed him, and we kind of thought he was a defensive midfielder at the time. I think we signed him as, but was played at centre back from sort of moment one, but never really. So it took a while to settle. Let's just put it that way. But once he did, it was pretty clear that he was a very, very talented footballer. And as you say, the evidence was there. But a huge loss to the club, and especially hard to take because he dropped a division to Southampton, who are obviously league below us at the time, and had financial issues themselves prior. And it was I think Pardew in charge of them at the time as well.
Yes, it was.
Oh, dear. So if it could have got any worse, but there we are. And obviously later on, losing Moses to Wigan as well for a pittance. I think they attempted to sell Klein as well, but he turned the move down. But it was a horrible time. Brendan Guilfoyle, of course, was the administrator, and we just had this constant cloud hanging over us. It just seemed to get darker and darker and darker, and we were just dropping further and further down the division, really sort of struggling to keep our heads above water when it ended up in the relegation zone, of course. But there were bright sparks amongst all of the rumours about what may or may not happen, and we'll get into those bright sparks just after what Mike says.
I was just going to say, what I always thought with the time is we had certain characters in the team, Clint Hill, Matty Lawrence, and
Sure, Derry.
always thought, yeah. But I was always a massive fan of Lawrence. They always had this
Why?
kind of...
Sorry. Carry on.
I loved his kind of laconic style, and those kind of players, dependable players in those kind of situations. So they were the sort of silver lining, but it was pretty grim, wasn't it?
Yeah, definitely. But you're right. We had a squad full of characters, and that's the only reason we survived like we did. Spoiler alert. But talking of bright moments, we were still in the FA Cup, and sandwiched between two league victories, we went to we played Wolves at Selhurst Park, and a certain Danny Butterfield played as a striker that day.
Called Neil Warnock. We had a five-a-side on the Monday, I think, and me and Alan Lee played up front, just jovial way in training, and he kept passing and I kept putting it in the net, and it was going on, and then Neil Warnock pulled me after training and said, "But Klein needs to turn down and move to Wolves, so he's going to play right back, and you're going to play up front with Alan Lee and Darren Ambrose." And I was like, yeah. He went, no, you are, son. You are. You'll play up front and you'll score. And I was like, okay, yeah, all right. So I didn't think anything of it. Turns up to Selhurst, he's written the team on the board, and I was playing up front. And I was thinking, what on earth? Anyway, it's a free hit. I remember Sean Derry laughing at me, going, "Butts, what are you doing up there?" And Clint Hill, Matty Lawrence, was all laughing. Anyway, for the first 45 minutes, I don't think I could have played any worse. I don't know if you remember the game. I was terrible. I think I was miscontrolling it. I was thinking, all I was thinking was, if he makes a sub, please sub Pliny off and put me at right back so I can at least redeem myself a little bit. But remember when we started the second half and I obviously got the first one, and then it was just like, no, it was just ridiculous. It just kept going. And Big Alan Lee was causing Jody Craddock problems, running around with his head strapped up. And then I was just gambling on the flick. So, yeah, it's just sort of happened really quickly. And it still bamboozles me now to think that it really happened, because it did happen in such a short space of time, and everyone on the pitch was just laughing. It still didn't seem real on the night. Everyone was just laughing in the celebration. So,
couple of memories I have from that is that we don't get that many games over here in America, especially when Palace back then, but they actually put that game on the television over here. So I actually saw that game, and I was in absolute shock to see a fullback score 3 goals. It was an amazing thing. I know at the time also, because of the administration, we needed the money, and I was actually glad. I think, yes, was it a replayed game? It was a replayed game, and we got the extra money. So I was like, okay, great, we got the extra money from the replay. If we win, who cares? And then we ended up winning the match. And I was like, oh, great, now we've got another round match. And I was like, it was surprised. But like I said, the fact that I got to see it on TV, which is such a rare thing over here at that time with the FA Cup, they put that on a lot over here, but not the league games. It was great to see it, but again, and it was a natural natural hat trick, left foot, right foot header. Amazing. It's just one of the best stories I've ever been around. It was just phenomenal.
And am I right in thinking it was also the perfect hat trick in that it was all in the same half without another goal going between it? So that is the perfect hat trick twice.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So, yeah.
yeah, and one of the quickest hat tricks we'd ever had as
6
well. It's
minutes or
insane.
something. Yeah. But yeah, that evening, I was on a date and I took a lovely lady, an Arsenal fan, along to see the game, and I was, in retrospect, probably not the greatest date idea for an Arsenal fan, really. But she got to see that, and I think did become a bit of a Palace sympathiser after that. And she has since referred to it as the Danny Butterfield evening. But it wasn't too long afterwards that I think it might have even been what would have been our next date. She was quite out of my league, quite posh, and she texted me saying, "Do you like Rachmaninoff?" And I was like, "Yeah, it's all right." She's like, "What?" I said, "Well, I mean, it's all right as vodkas go. It's all right. Like it's not a bad vodka." And she's like, "What are you talking about?" I was like, "Are you talking about that vodka from Lidl's, right?" And she's like, "No, well, I was going to take you to the opera or some classical thing because you took me to the football." And I was like, "Oh, okay. That's not the Rachmaninoff I was thinking of." And I think we lasted about another week after that, and that was it. It was all done.
That says a lot about you that I'm not sure you wanted to reveal, but yeah, right, nice one.
Well, I mean, that's kind of blown the comment I was going to make out of the water, to be honest. But all I was going to say was rewatching that hat trick, which was great fun, and you should do it if you haven't recently. It was particularly sweet to look at who the goalkeeper was, which was one Wayne Hennessy.
Yeah, Chris. Yeah, it was Wayne Hennessy, wasn't it? Yeah, I mean, look, he's a Palace player, isn't he? And we've had our moments with him. But yeah, I think he'll probably look back at that and think it probably wasn't the greatest goalkeeping display ever. However, take nothing away from Danny Butterfield. It is worth pointing out, as I know Danny does as well, that the following game he did play up front as well, but not for quite as long as not quite as effectively. But it was just a glorious moment in time and one of those very typical Palace situations that, in the worst of adversity, with nothing to suggest that it would ever happen, we end up having a full-back play up front and score a hat-trick in a game that was hugely important to keep that cut run going. Because, of course, we drew Villa in the next round, and an Ambrose scream of a free kick against Gabor Kiraly in his grey jogging bottoms. That was another huge moment in the season, and just to watch Ambrose score that goal, just beautiful. But of course, the really sour part of this period of the season was the 1st of March 2010. As had been rumoured for quite some time, and he only really hung on to see us through what was eventually a defeat in the replay against Villa. Neil Warnock left Palace to go to QPR, and at that moment, the kind of your leaders have abandoned the club. You've lost lost quality from the squad. There's all sorts of talk of other players leaving, and you just don't really know what's going to happen next. You're struggling down the bottom of the league because you can't really buy a victory. I think we didn't win more than, after those 3 games we won in a row, we won 3 more league games in the whole of the season, whole of the second half of the season. It was brutal and painful and heartbreaking. It really, really was. But of course, the dream team that sort of came together to steer us through it was, I suppose there's probably plenty of fans who wouldn't even recall this, but Paul Hart, who had managed Portsmouth. I mean, he was mostly an assistant manager and a youth coach, wasn't he, Paul Hart? I think. But yeah, he came in and he brought Dougie Freeman with him, and we'd let Dougie go the back end of the previous season to go to start of this season maybe, to go to Southend to continue his playing career because he wasn't going to get any games at Palace. But he basically gave up his playing career to come back and work with Paul Hart with the sole intention of saving the football club. And it was a huge, huge thing for him to do. And the two of them, for what they did back end of that season, again, spoiler alert, will go down, should go down in history with a huge appreciation of all Palace fans, because it was phenomenal what happened.
I'll just take it back to the Warnock going. I mean, in retrospect now, it makes a lot of sense. But at the time, I don't think I've ever been more angry and vitriolic towards a Palace manager going. I was absolutely livid because I was convinced that we'd be fine while he was still there. And I didn't really know who to blame. Back then you're sort of on, I don't know, BBS occasionally, homestale.net when it was the forums were going, sort of, and you were taking half your news from various South London press and the forums, and I couldn't quite work out what had gone on, but I was so angry, and I thought we're in big trouble. And in fact, we're looking back. Hart did a decent job as a caretaker manager. He hasn't had a particularly huge career since, and he's only an assistant manager now. So I'd imagine that he looks back on that period quite fondly, even though it was very much mixed results for him.
What interests me about what you've said there, Mike, is about your anger, because I was gutted, but I wasn't angry, really, because, I mean, obviously, if you're going to be hyper political, which obviously we don't on this podcast, then I'd have been angry about the role of a hedge fund in pushing our club into that situation. But by that stage, it was clear that we were in deep, deep, deep financial trouble. We got a significant amount of money. I mean, it wasn't as much as £1 million, unfortunately, which it should have been. But we got some compensation for him. I was gutted to see him go. I really like him as a manager. I did when he came back as well. But the anger, clearly, I mean, I'm hoping you're going to confirm this, would be directed at the people in charge who were causing this situation and letting him walk out. Because I don't think he wanted to. It was pretty apparent from interviews that he didn't. It certainly felt that way to me. I did not feel that he wanted to leave us, and certainly I didn't want him to go. So jump in and tell me what you think.
Yeah, when these kind of things happen, and I'm older now, and say for example, Wan-Bissaka, you can be annoyed. As a younger man, I was pissed off with Warnock. I mean, I knew that it was because it was financial, because I felt that he was taking the decision based on finances. I was annoyed with him. I was annoyed at the situation, but I blamed him, and it took me a long time. I mean, now I quite love him. I think he's a lovable rogue, and his interviews last season about Cardiff were pretty awesome. But yeah, I was genuinely. But when you're young, you sort of make these rash decisions about whether you don't like people or not, and it certainly happened in that situation.
Yeah, you're not a politician where you need to apologise or anything. It's fine.
No, what I will say is that there are certain things that Warnock did. I mean, look, it was self-serving to leave when he did, but at the same time, it's realistic to say he couldn't do the job that he wanted to do and the job he was employed to do in the way he felt he wanted to do it because of the situation, and it wasn't of his doing. So you can see that argument. But the tapping up of players, the alleged tapping up of players. In fact, I think some people have been on record about it. But sort of the general timing of it all was quite difficult to take. But yeah, most of that anger comes from the situation we were in as a club and the fear for the future, I think. One little comment on Paul Hart. I did get the opportunity to speak to Paul Hart at a Cray Wanderers game the following season. And I know he was invited back to Palace and sort of given a round of applause by the fans. But I was really happy to actually get an opportunity to thank him personally. He clearly held, at the time he was academy director for Charlton, which he was sort of apologetic about when I spoke to him, which shows you the awareness he had about Palace and sort of South London rivalry and all that, such that it is. But he couldn't sort of speak highly enough of. He was very, very complimentary to working with Dougie. He was very, very happy to have worked for Palace and done what he did, and so humble when he was being thanked as well. So absolutely top fella. I've got a lot of time for Paul Hart and what he did, because it was a hugely difficult situation, and to achieve what we ended up achieving, he has to take a huge amount of credit for that.
And obviously, we're going to come to the end of the story, which is whether or not we stay up. Keep listening.
Who knows?
But Paul Hart, the year after, when the club finally released a kind of long-term DVD about all of the history of the club, especially 2005 to 2011. He spoke at Fairfield Halls at the kind of launch of that film, and a lot of us were in the audience watching that, and there was a little kind of Q&A thing afterwards, and it just kind of reinforces what you've said, Chris, about his affection and memory for the club and its fans, and he's someone. To be honest, I was gutted that he didn't get the chance to lead the team and lead the club for a bit longer. But it's what it is.
Back of the Nest, the Palace years.
So dealing with the loss of a manager and the new management team of Paul Hart and Dougie Freedman, the team sort of went into they actually went into a run-in. I think the one of the turning points, I don't know if it's the same game you were referring to earlier, Mike, but we won against Watford, which was kind of the turning point. They were down there struggling with us at the same time. We managed to beat them. And also, following that, we took a welcome victory against Preston, because we've been through a long period of having to play Preston way too much and rarely beating them. And those two victories were very, very important. Unfortunately, what happened was it was followed by a loss to QPR, now managed by Neil Warnock, of course. Then draws against Derby and West Brom. And then that West Brom game, that's the one where Alassane Ndiaye scored that header. That was a really important point. It was great. But that meant it went down to the final game of the season. We all know what that final game of the season was. Sheffield Wednesday. The situation was Sheffield Wednesday had to beat us. It was at Hillsborough. I've never known anything like it, I'll be honest with you, to have to go into the... Stockport was a distant memory. I suppose that's the comparable one. But for me, I was still pretty young for the Stockport game, and it didn't really seem as dramatic as it did going into the Sheffield Wednesday game. Again, we'd struggled for victories, so we knew it was going to be tough. They were absolutely desperate, a packed Hillsborough, baying for blood. But those characters we talked about earlier, Mike, you brought it up quite a lot. We just had that bit of confidence going into it because of the people who were in that team. Paddy McCarthy is one that immediately springs to mind. And then obviously you would go beyond, Claude Davis, of course, also at the back into midfield. Derry was an absolute monster in there when he wanted to be. And he really did want to be in his second spell for Palace. And of course, just Clint Hill. We could talk so much about Clint Hill, and I'm sure we will. But it was just, it didn't stop the nerves, though, I have to say. Knowing that all those players were there, it still didn't stop me absolutely bricking it ahead of the game.
Well, I remember I was on tour at the time, but was lucky that it was on the telly. And I wasn't worried because I think I probably already had a skinful in the pub, so that always helps, bit of Dutch courage. But we took the lead, and at the point we went 1-0 up, I thought there's no way that Wednesday is going to score two. We've got this. We only need the point. So I didn't feel. I felt nervous before the game a little bit, but other than that, after the goal went in, I didn't feel the stress that I felt with the Stockport game. I got to say,
I was stressed. But context to this, it was a few days before the general election of 2010, and I was running to be the MP for my hometown. I had absolutely no chance of winning. But it meant I couldn't go to the game, which otherwise I would absolutely have done. And yeah, I sat at home and watched it with my dad, and it was actually really interesting in that respect because I got loads of emails from people in Ashford, that was the place that I was running, saying, we support other teams, but we respect the fact that you care that much, that you've been social mediaing about this. So we're going to vote for you now, whereas we might not have done. So fair enough, I'll take that.
Didn't make a difference, though, did it, Chris?
Well, in the end, it was not in the election, no.
No, that's what I mean.
Palace stayed up. Well, that was one of two things that mattered. So, 1 out of 2 ain't bad. In future, maybe things will change in a different direction.
Listen, if Palace have to fail for you to succeed politically, I'm not prepared for us to make that sacrifice.
I'm not talking about me personally, mate. You know that. I'm never about me personally.
Right, of course.
Yeah,
no, look, it was
our common endeavour. We achieve more than we achieve alone.
Oh, he's off. He's off again.
Yes, I am.
You're not allowed to say that. There was an official ban on that word. Mikey, can you beep that word, please? It's now officially a swear on the show. So, again, memory-wise, all the pressure kind of lifted, as you say, Mike, when Alan Lee heads the ball in for the opening goal. But Leon Clark, I think this was a turning point, really, wasn't it? Because
I thought it was Ambrose scored the first one. Am I getting them mixed up?
I thought it was Alan Lee with a header.
It was Alan Lee.
Oh, okay.
From a corner, direct from a corner, really good corner.
Yeah. Do
you remember when we had good corner routines? It was one of those. Yeah. And yeah, so he heads it in, and the pressure starts to lift, and you think they're gonna crumble now. But then Leon Clark, who was a decent player on his day, Butterfield claimed a foul. He will still claim a foul today. I think it was 50-50. It went in favour of Clark, and he finished brilliantly. But for me, the turning point in that game in a lot of ways was the fact that he ran off celebrating and kicked an advertising hoarding and broke his toe and had to go off, because he was a real danger that day. And had he stayed on the pitch, who knows? It could have been very, very different. But the moment you're thinking about, Mike, was obviously when Dye, remember him, puts Scannell through on the right-hand side. Just bring him up every opportunity I can. Put Scanlon on the right-hand side. Brilliant cutback. And as I was saying earlier, Ambrose, it just went in however he hit it. It wasn't the sweetest of strikes, but it was on target, went under the keeper, just kept it nice and low. The celebrations when that goal went in were just absolutely sensational. The players losing their minds completely. And, of course, late on, Darren Purse pulled one back for Wednesday to get it level to 2-2. And the iconic moment.
I was going to say, let's get to the really good parts.
Well, the really good parts. But first of all, as the final whistle went, you can see Paddy McCarthy's organising the players for the corner. But for some reason, referees tend to allow the corners to be taken no matter what's happening. But that day, and I'm thankful we didn't let it come in. We blew the whistle. It's just a camera on Paddy's face as he's shouting, and then goes sort of like, what's happened there? I think we interviewed him about it. I can't remember what he said, but I think he similarly was shocked that the whistle had gone, and the celebrations were obviously immense. But my God, what happened afterwards was carnage, wasn't it? And we just all know it's the Clint Hill thing, isn't it? Essentially, a shirtless Clint Hill decided to not deciding, he had to essentially fight his way through what, in my mind, is now thousands and thousands of Sheffield Wednesday fans all baying for his blood. And, again, in my mind, Clint Hill's just punching left, right and centre and knocking them all flat, and it's just an unstoppable machine. In reality, I think, he might have got a couple of hits in, but he was quickly shepherded off, and a few players came out to help and get him into that tunnel.
I heard him talk about it much more recently than the footage that's on YouTube, and it seems to have sort of moved from not being scared to being like properly in a boxing match. I think in his head it's become a little bit more of a fight than it was at the time. But they showed the footage on the TV at the time, and it's just like, yes, this is awesome. This must be how like Millwall fans feel most weeks. It was pretty special, and the fact he had his shirt off just made it even more iconic. And then the scenes from the dressing room afterwards with them all doing stupid dances Awesome.
Yeah, it was just ridiculous. But I do think about it now, and I think some of the attention, rightly so, that when you get fans run on the pitch and punch players. I think it was Grealish last year got punched, didn't they?
Shame.
But for some reason, an entire Sheffield Wednesday support emptying them onto the pitch and effectively trying to fight one player didn't really, no one really paid that much attention to it. But it was, when you look at the footage, I'm not trying to overplay it. When you look at the footage, around a second and a half after they get the players finally into the tunnel, that tunnel is absolutely swarming with fans going crazy. It was terrifying.
I mean,
really,
you'd be
think
pissed
about
off
it.
too if you'd just been relegated at home on the last day,
Yeah.
and the other team are celebrating. So you kind of understand it. But yeah, you can say these things happened back in the day, but we're actually talking about 2010. We're talking about the decades. It's not a long time ago.
It's also 15 years after Monica Seles was stabbed by some person with a vendetta, let's put it that way. And that's scary, and that's why we're not allowed to intrude. Now, I mean, as someone who invaded the pitch when Dulwich Hamlet were promoted 2 seasons ago, that was by invitation, effectively, and it was cool. But I would never, ever, ever do that, and I don't think any of us would we? I mean, we can't quite do a poll because there's like 3 of us, but
no, but I mean, obviously, that thought. But I'd say my trigger is appalling referees.
Yeah, but you still wouldn't go on and jump in, would you?
But it crosses my mind. But the difference is, I'm an adult to a degree, and and I realise that that's not an acceptable thing to do. Although sometimes, come on, sometimes. Clattenburg.
Well, we're all about to find out what each other are really like in game scenarios, aren't we? When we're stood together over a whole year.
Yeah, here we are next season, all together in the Homesdale. But anyway, I think obviously it was disappointing that we couldn't keep the best of that team together at the end of the season, of course. But it was just, as far as Palace moments go, as far as memories and nostalgia and all that, it's right up there. The relief and joy together in such huge quantities was, there's no real feeling quite like it. But unfortunately, once the excitement and the adrenaline died down, we had the reality of what was happening off the pitch to deal with. Patrick's mentioned that the Supporters Trust in May of 2010 launched a major fundraising scheme and for overseas fans sending in money, and he sent in $50, and it just felt hopeless, and a lot of people felt that, and we didn't really know what to do until that everything kind of crystallised into that one moment on the 1st of June where the club released the fact that they were having to negotiate Selhurst, say the club, effectively CPFC 2010, as they became, revealed that they couldn't complete their purchase of the club without the ground, and that Lloyd's held the ownership of the ground. It was a different administration to the club, so they could buy the club but not the ground, and that things were in dire straits. And what happened was quite phenomenal, and everybody came together as one in London on that day.
A champagne moment. They couldn't really believe it. Tension had mounted as the 3 o'clock deadline for a deal ticked past. This had gone well into extra time. The administrator had threatened to start selling off the players at 3, so some people needed to see news of the deal with a new consortium in black and white before belief followed.
Should keep the club underground. So tell me, what does that mean?
Everything! Absolutely everything!
Well, there we are. A pretty amazing turnout of fans there. I remember being trapped at work and just so sick to my stomach that I wasn't there, and hearing from so many people I knew that were. formerly of this parish, Ben Nagel being one of them. Now such a big cheese at the Sports Mail online, but it was brilliant and it worked. That's the thing. From what Steve Parish has said, someone very, very high up at Lloyd's. Obviously, the deal wasn't being done in that building or anything like that. There were people jumping over cars and all that kind of stuff, and that pressure worked. It made people get round the table and come to a deal, and that deal became a reality on the 7th of June when CPFC 2010 issued the following statement. CPFC 2010 are pleased to announce that we today completed the acquisition of Crystal Palace Football Club from the administrator of CPFC 2000. We have exchanged contracts and paid a deposit on Sellers Park. The sale will complete when we satisfy the Football League's requirements, and CPFC 2010 are assigned to the Football League share. All that then remains is for the successful conclusion of the creditors' voluntary agreement. We feel confident this will be a positive outcome. The former secured creditor of the club, that's Simon Jordan, I guess, accepted a shortfall on their settlement. In light of this and the fact that CPFC 2010 were and are the only party serious about acquiring the club, we believe our offer represents the best value for creditors. We'd like to take this opportunity to thank Lloyds Banking Group for their genuine concern for the future of the club and the recognition of what it meant to the community and fans. We are extremely grateful. And that statement was such a huge relief. And it was the start of something very, very special. But it was just the start. And we'll talk much, much more about that in the next episode of Back of the Nest, the Palace Years. But before we end, Mike, I'm hoping you've got some old correspondence. Now, we tried to go back and look at Twitter, didn't we? And essentially Twitter didn't properly, well, it existed, but there wasn't a lot going on back then. So Mike's had a look at various bits and pieces. But I know, Chris, you seem to want to speak before I go any further.
This is not even about social media, but what it is about is the fact that, so at this stage, so we're talking, 2009-10, I didn't have a season ticket, but I did have what they called a Selhurst Super 6, which meant
I remember.
You had a minimum of 6 games that you could get tickets to, and went well over that, which is why I ended up getting a season ticket the next year. But I was in Block V most of the time. There was a nutcase to my right who spent most of his time baiting the away fans. But to my left, in Block B, as was, there were a ton of children, I would say between 5 and 10, who had their shirts off, were looping around their heads, dancing at the front. And so the comment I wanted to make and the question I wanted to ask is whether any of them are listening to this, and if so, can they share their memories of these seasons coming forward so that we can include those? Because we're going to include some social media, real-time comments, but let's include some of those people's memories looking back as well.
And more to the point, if they are listening, have they got to this point in the pod? If they have, fair enough.
Yeah, probably should have said that up the top. Email us hi@backofthenest.com with all your memories of these seasons. Probably should have asked beforehand as well. But hey,
yeah,
Mike, over to you.
As Hambo's alluded to, I thought as we go through these, and the plan is for this first season, we'll see how long it takes, see how far we take it, but we're going to take year by year for this decade up to the 18-19 season. We will add in a splash of social media. However, Twitter back in those days, to give you an idea, there's something like 25 consecutive tweets from the club themselves that have no comments at all and no likes. So it was very much in its infancy. So I've resorted to that worst of things, Facebook, and there's not a great deal to go on. But I can leave you, first of all, from a comment from our very own Mikey, who at the time he posted a Facebook comment to say, "New stadium looks fucking awesome." And we'll discuss this next time. 40,000 seater glass roof. I'm buying a season ticket for sure. CPFC 2010 we love you. So we'll go into that particular disaster next time.
All I want to say is that this the most amazing concentrate of bullshit in one statement that I could ever see in my life.
Then I've just chosen a comment by I'm not going to give them a name because they might not want to. They might not have nothing to do and hate our podcast and don't want anything to do with it. But somebody said, and this will take us into the next season for the next episode. It looks like the heroics of last season. So this was written at the end of the season. And celebrations on the last day meant nothing. Derry, Carl, Hill and Ambrose are going. Paddy, Speroni and Dans could follow. It's not looking good. If and when CPFC 2010 take over, they'll have to buy a bunch of new players. So it seems pretty pointless letting the heart of this team go. So we'll see what happens next week, won't we, people?
Indeed we will, and do join us for that. You've said next week. It could be any time. Time is like that. It's a fairly I can't even think of the word. Chris, what's the word? Oh, you've had quite a lot of rum, haven't you? So you might not know.
I was on mute. Next time on Back of the Nest, the Palace years.
I mean, that's not what I was after.
Well, what did you want?
Sort of just ended sort of on a bit of a thing. So I'm just gonna let this out. If you could just sort of put, Mike, if you just put some sort of sad music on as I sort of mumble and just slowly fade us out, that'd be great. Join us next time on Back of the Nest, the Palace Years.
Back of the Nest, the Palace Years.